Conflict, regional rivalries maybe, and that's climate change. The longest river, the Euphrates, dries up.
The Euphrates River has been drying up for years, and as it did, it exposed something buried beneath its floor, a sealed cave. Warnings carved into every wall in 17 ancient languages, all saying the same thing. Do not unseal. Held until the appointed time. Inside a second room, a body was found seated upright against the wall, arms crossed over its chest, facing the center of the chamber. It was not buried. It was placed there on purpose. Since this discovery, the ground has been shaking. Figures have been reported in the sky, and people across the region have felt a dread they cannot name or explain. Signs that align with end-time prophecy in chilling detail. Jesus warned that when these things begin, it has already started. The river is exposing something. The Euphrates River is one of the longest rivers in the world. It runs through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. For thousands of years, every civilization that built near it depended on it to survive. But for the past several years, something has been happening to it that scientists, governments, and satellite systems have all confirmed. The river is shrinking. Not slowly and not naturally. It is pulling back at a pace that has alarmed researchers across multiple countries. A geological team was sent to monitor the area, and what they found in the data stopped them. The ground beneath the receding water was not behaving normally. Pressure readings in certain zones were completely off. The soil composition in specific areas did not match anything around it. The lead geologist later said he knew something was buried down there before excavation even began. The data was already telling him. He just did not know what. Here is what makes this river different from every other river on Earth. The Euphrates appears in the very first book of the Bible and the very last. In Genesis, it is named as one of the 4 rivers that flowed directly out of the Garden of Eden. In Revelation chapter 16, verse 12, God names it again, this time as a river that will dry up, as one of the specific signs that the end is near. Not a symbol, a physical, measurable event that the whole world would be able to see. Satellites have been confirming for years that the river is doing exactly that. What is happening right now was written down thousands of years ago. That is not a climate story, that is a countdown. The geological team brought in ground-penetrating radar and scanned deep beneath the riverbed. What came back on the monitors made them run the scan 3 times before anyone spoke. The ground beneath the river was hollow, structured, completely sealed. Not a natural air pocket, not a geological gap, a chamber, large enough to walk into, and deliberately closed off from the world above it. One of the team members looked at the monitor, then looked at the lead geologist and said, "That should not be there." Nobody disagreed. It took days of careful excavation to reach it. The heavy machinery could only go so far before the risk of collapse forced the team to slow down and work by hand. When they finally broke through, the entrance stopped everyone cold. The angles were too clean. The geometry was too precise. Erosion does not produce edges like that. This was not something nature carved over thousands of years. This was something that had been deliberately sealed, and now, for the first time, it was open. And what was carved into every wall inside would make it immediately clear that whoever sealed it never intended for it to be found. The chamber. The first thing that hit them was not the size of the room. It was the walls. Every inch of stone surface in that chamber was covered in writing, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, not drawings, not symbols left by a passing traveler. Deliberate, deep, forceful writing, carved into the rock by people who needed it to last. And it was not in one language. Archaeologists identified 17 ancient languages across those walls: Sumerian, Akkadian, Aramaic, Old Persian, civilizations that rose and fell centuries apart from each other, in completely separate parts of the ancient world, with no known contact between them. All of them had been inside this chamber. But that was not the part that silenced the room. The team began studying the carvings more closely, and what they found changed the entire weight of the discovery. The writing styles were different from section to section. The depth of the cuts into the stone was different. The tools used to carve each language were different. This was not one group of people who happened to know 17 languages. These were 17 different groups from different centuries, each one making their way to this exact chamber and carving their message onto whatever space was left on the walls. Century after century, civilization after civilization, each one adding their voice to the ones already there. And every single one of them wrote the same thing: do not unseal, held until the appointed time. Whatever was inside that chamber was not abandoned. It was not forgotten. It was being kept there on purpose. And whoever wrote those words believed there was a specific moment in the future when that holding would end. That alone should have been enough to make the team turn around. But there was something else. In the entire ancient world, every message of importance carried a name. Kings cut their titles into everything they built. Priests signed their inscriptions with the name of their god. No significant warning, no royal decree, no religious text was ever left without an author. Identity was everything. It was how the ancient world worked. Not one of these messages had a name attached to it. Across 17 languages, across centuries of different writers, across what must have been dozens of separate visits to this chamber by people who had no way of knowing the others had come before them. Not one signature, not one seal, not one claim of authorship anywhere on those walls. Something had brought civilization after civilization to this location and made sure they all wrote the same warning. And whatever that something was, it never once identified itself. That silence is not an oversight. It is a message of its own. Then someone pointed a light toward the upper section of the wall directly above the center of the chamber. Running from the top of the wall downward was a sequence of carved symbols, each one slightly different from the one above it. The team brought in archaeologists to examine the pattern. Their conclusion was clear. It was not decorative. It was not religious imagery. It was a countdown, a deliberate sequence moving toward a fixed endpoint, with each carving bringing it one step closer. There was no beginning point visible anywhere on the wall. Only the final stages of the sequence remained. Whoever carved it removed the starting point on purpose. They did not want anyone to know how long the clock had been running. They left only what was necessary for someone at the end to recognize. The finish line. The Book of Enoch is an ancient text quoted directly in the New Testament book of Jude. It describes powerful non-human beings called the Watchers, imprisoned by divine order beneath the earth. It states that warnings were carved at the site of their imprisonment so that future generations would know the location and stay away. The chamber matches that description point by point. The book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 4, records God telling the prophet that certain things would be sealed until the time of the end. Revelation, chapter 5, verse 1, describes a scroll that cannot be opened until the appointed moment. Across multiple books, across centuries of different writers, the same pattern holds. Some things were not lost. They were deliberately locked away until the exact moment they were always meant to be opened. The countdown on that wall had reached its end. The chamber was open. The warning had been read by the very people it was written to keep out. And behind the main chamber, a narrow passage led into a second room. What was inside it would reframe everything the team thought they understood about what this place actually was. The inner room and what was left behind. The second room was smaller and darker than the first. The air inside felt different, heavier. The team moved carefully, and when their lights reached the center of the room, they stopped. There was a body. It was seated directly in front of the largest wall inscription, spine straight, chin level, both arms crossed over its chest. The posture was not one of death. It was one of guard duty. It had not been placed the way bodies are placed in burial. There was no mourning arrangement. No grieving family had laid this person down. Whoever this was had sat down in that position, in that specific spot, facing that specific wall, and never got up again. Surrounding the body were objects arranged in a precise pattern. Obsidian daggers, stone tablets covered in script that no one could immediately read, ceremonial tools made from gold and bone. The team looked at the layout, and the first instinct was to call it a burial. But the more they studied it, the more that word felt wrong. This was not a burial. This was something else entirely. To understand what this room actually was, you need to know about a group of priests from ancient. The Ashapu were not ordinary priests. They did not lead worship or perform religious ceremonies. Their entire purpose was one thing: to seal locations where dangerous non-human entities had been encountered. They were specialists in containment, and they used very specific tools to do it. Obsidian, the black volcanic glass used to make those daggers, was considered a spiritual mirror in multiple ancient cultures. It was used specifically in binding rituals, in ceremonies designed to trap and hold something in place. Gold was believed to function as a spiritual anchor, a material that kept what had been sealed from breaking free. Bone instruments were used in ceremonies meant to prevent whatever was confined from returning. Every single object in that room, when read through that framework, was not a burial kit. It was a containment kit. Each item had a specific function in keeping something sealed, and a priest found inside a sealed chamber is not a victim who was trapped. He is the one who chose to stay. The Ashipu who performed the sealing did not always leave afterward. Sometimes they remained inside, to maintain the binding from within, to hold the seal in place with their presence. This man did not die here by accident. He stayed here on purpose. This was his post, and he never left it. But who or what was he containing? The Book of Enoch describes the spirits of dead Nephilim in a way that is deeply unsettling. The Nephilim were beings described in Genesis chapter 6 as the offspring of fallen angels and human women. When they died, their spirits did not pass on the way human spirits do. According to Enoch, they became evil spirits that roam the earth, producing illness, confusion, and corruption in everything around them. They could not find rest because they were never fully human to begin with. A preserved Nephilim body in a sealed chamber, surrounded by containment instruments and guarded by a priest who never left, is not simply an ancient relic. Within its own framework, it is a vessel for something that does not rest. Here is what makes it worse. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 says, "The Nephilim appeared again after the flood. The flood did not end them." In the book of Numbers, chapter 13, Israelite spies encountered giants in the land of Canaan and described feeling like grasshoppers next to them. David killed Goliath, who came from that same lineage. The corruption of Genesis 6 was not finished by one event. It kept returning, and it required repeated intervention to push back. The priest in that room understood something about what he was containing. He understood it well enough to seal himself inside with it and never come out. As the team moved back through the narrow passage and into the main chamber, they turned their lights toward the center of the room, and what they found standing there stopped every one of them cold. The chains. 4 chains stood at the center of the chamber, not hanging from the ceiling, not attached to any wall. Each one was driven directly into the bedrock floor at 4 fixed points, one to the north, one to the south, one to the east, one to the west. The spacing between them was exact, not approximate, exact, as if whoever placed them had measured the distance down to the last inch. The investigators walked the full length of the chamber and came to one conclusion. This room was not built for storage. It was not built for worship. It was not built for any of the reasons ancient underground spaces are typically built. Every wall, every sealed passage, every layer of warning carved into the stone existed for a single purpose: to keep something locked at those 4 points. Then they examined the chains up close, and that is when the atmosphere in the room shifted. There were no joints in the metal, no connection points, no evidence of the chains ever being assembled, link by link, the way any chain ever made by human hands would have to be. Each chain was one continuous piece, seamless from one end to the other, as if it had not been built at all, but simply appeared in its current form. Specialists were brought in to analyze the metal composition. What they found was difficult to process. To produce metal with that molecular structure, the temperature required would exceed 3,000 degrees Celsius. The surface of the sun burns at around 5,500 degrees. 3,000 degrees sits closer to that than to anything a human furnace has ever reached in all of recorded history, ancient or modern. No civilization on this earth has ever had the ability to produce what was sitting on that chamber floor. One of the investigators reached out and touched one of the chains. He stepped back immediately. The chain was warm, not the kind of warm that comes from sitting in a heated room. The kind of warm that tells you something is generating heat from within. Thermal equipment was brought in, and the readings confirmed it. The surrounding rock was completely cold. The earth around the chains showed no heat at all. The warmth was coming from inside the metal itself. Steady, contained, continuous. Something had been producing heat from within those chains for what the evidence suggested was thousands of years, with no external source to account for it. Ancient Sumerian texts written long before the Bible existed describe divine beings imprisoned beneath the earth along a great river, held in place by chains inside a sealed underground space. The Sumerians were among the earliest civilizations ever to exist in the region, now called Iraq. Their records are among the oldest ever recovered, and their description of the imprisonment site matches the Euphrates basin. Their description of the restraints matches what was found in that chamber. Revelation chapter 9, verses 14 and 15 describe 4 beings bound at the Euphrates, held until a specific hour, day, month, and year, all fixed in advance. The Greek word used for their condition is hetoimazmenoi. It does not mean imprisoned. It means prepared and made ready for deployment. These were not defeated beings left to rot. They were weapons being held until their moment arrived. And when the team examined the fracture points of those chains, what they found made everything else in that chamber suddenly make sense. The Baal statue and the gold coin. Before anyone examined the chain fractures, 2 other discoveries had already been made near the entrance of the cave. Taken separately, each one was deeply troubling. Taken together, they told a story that changed everything. The first was a coin. It was found buried in the sediment of the riverbed, just outside the chamber entrance. At first glance, it looked like any ancient corroded piece of metal, but once it was carefully cleaned, the images on its surface became impossible to ignore. On one side, a figure was seated on a throne. It was crowned and winged and clearly not human. Its posture was one of authority, and it was depicted as something that ruled and received. On the other side was a star-shaped symbol surrounded by flame-like patterns that curved and twisted like serpents moving outward in every direction. The coin matched no known empire, no recorded dynasty, no identified belief system from the region. Scholars could not place it anywhere in the existing historical record, but what they could identify was its function. In ancient Mesopotamia, the deliberate burial of tokens and objects at specific locations was a documented religious act. It was a way of dedicating that ground to a specific deity, a way of saying that the land and everything beneath it belonged to something. A coin buried in the riverbed above a sealed chamber was not currency lost in the current. Within its own ritual logic, it was a declaration. This ground is claimed. What is beneath it is ours. The Apostle Paul wrote in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 20, that the sacrifices made to idols in the ancient world were not made to empty statues. They were made to demons. The coin was not just a cultural artifact. It was a transaction, an offering made to something real. The second discovery was harder to look at. Half buried in the mud near the cave entrance, investigators uncovered a stone statue. It was seated on a throne with both hands extended forward, as if still waiting to receive something. A horned crown rose sharply from its head. Behind it, carved into the stone, was a circular disc that framed it like a halo, and etched into the base of the statue, in ancient script, was a name: Baal. Baal was not simply an idol from a forgotten religion. He was the center of one of the darkest systems of worship ever recorded in the ancient world. During the reign of King Ahab of Israel, under the influence of his wife Queen Jezebel, Baal worship spread across the nation. Altars were built everywhere. The worship involved rituals that were gruesome beyond description. Chief among them was child sacrifice. Infants were placed in the burning arms of a hollow bronze statue, heated from beneath by fire. The site where this happened was called the Tophet. The word Topheth means drum in Hebrew. Worshippers beat drums during the sacrifice so that the sound would drown out the screaming. Jesus Christ later took that same valley, the Valley of Hinnom, where the Tophet stood, and used it as his primary word for hell. In Hebrew, it became Gehenna. The place where children were burned alive became the word Jesus used to describe eternal judgment. He did not choose that word by accident. He was naming the destination of the system itself. The coin and the statue together tell one story. For centuries, people came to the site of that sealed chamber, not to warn against what was inside it. They came to worship it. The coin consecrated the ground. The statue received the offerings. An entire religious system had been built around the location of the imprisonment. and the god at the center of that system demanded the blood of children to keep it running. The artifacts rising from the Euphrates were not random. They were pieces of a deliberate ancient operation that had been running for a very long time. But the most important evidence was still inside the chamber, on the floor, in the dust. In the one place no one had thought to look until it was almost too late. The footprints. The chamber floor was covered in a thin layer of stone dust. It had been sitting undisturbed for centuries. No water had reached it. No air current had shifted it. No collapse had disturbed it. It lay completely flat and completely still, the way dust only settles in a space where absolutely nothing has moved for a very long time. Then one of the investigators crouched down and pointed a light across the surface. There were footprints pressed into the dust. 4 sets, each one clear, structured, and deliberate. Defined heel impact. Pressure through the mid-foot. The forward push of a body moving with complete control. Whatever made these prints was not crawling. It was not dragging itself. It was walking upright, fully balanced, and fully aware of where it was going. The weight analysis came back, and the lead investigator did not speak for a long time. Each set of prints indicated a body weighing between 400 and 500 pounds. Not distributed unevenly the way something wounded or unstable moves. Perfectly balanced across every single step. 4 separate beings, each one carrying roughly 4 times the body weight of a fully grown man, moving without one sign of struggle or strain. The stride length between each step was far beyond what human legs are built to produce. Scientists who study human movement examined the measurements and confirmed that whatever left these prints had limbs significantly longer and stronger than anything within the known range of human biology. Then came the detail about the dust itself. When something heavy steps onto a soft surface, the material underneath compresses downward. That is simply how weight and pressure work. But the dust in that chamber did not compress. It was pushed outward in every direction from each point of impact. When samples were examined under a microscope, the pattern did not look like a footprint pressed into powder. It looked like a small explosion. The ground had not absorbed the weight. It had absorbed an impact. But the detail that stopped the room completely was where the prints began. Not at the entrance, not in the center of the chamber. Each set of prints started at the exact location of each chain, right where the restraints had held something in place. That is where the first step was taken. And when investigators examined the fracture points of the chains, the detail that had been withheld until that moment finally came out. The chains had not been broken from outside. The force came from within. Whatever was held in those chains pulled against them with enough strength to tear through metal that was driven into solid bedrock. Then it stood up, and it walked. All 4 sets of prints moved in the same direction. No wandering, no circling. Moving in formation, straight toward the deeper passageways at the back of the chamber. 4 beings, coordinated, purposeful, moving as one, and there were no return tracks, not one print pointing back toward the entrance. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain a text called the Book of Giants. It describes beings of immense physical size imprisoned by divine order, beings whose proportions match exactly what the footprint analysis produced. This is a recovered historical document, not mythology, not legend. A text describing precisely the category of being whose prints were now pressed into that floor. The chamber was empty. Whatever had been held, there was gone. But thermal imaging sent into the deeper sections of the cave told a different story about how far they had actually gone. The feed came back, and the operator stopped breathing. Something was standing in there, a structured heat signature, the outline of a body, stationary at first. Then it shifted. It knew the camera was there. The proportions did not match anything in the known biological record. Limbs far longer than human limbs. An upper frame built entirely for power. The overall size matched the footprint calculations exactly. This was one of the 4. Then the skull came into focus. 2 horns, not a crown, not something placed on its head. Grown directly out of the bone, fused into the cranial structure as naturally as a jawbone. In ancient Mesopotamian art, spanning thousands of years, powerful non-human beings are consistently depicted with horns, not as symbols of evil, but as physical markers of a being in a completely different category from humanity. What the camera found in that cave had grown those horns. They were part of what it was. When a light source was directed at the figure, it did not reflect. Every surface reflects light. Rock, water, skin, metal. This figure absorbed it. Its edges blurred under direct illumination. Tracking systems lost focus on it repeatedly. It had been watching the camera from the moment the feed began. Not because it was startled, not because it was confused, but because it was deciding. When the light was pushed to its highest setting, it turned and walked deeper into the cave, slowly, without any sign of fear, as if the camera and everyone behind it were nothing more than a minor interruption on the way to somewhere it was already going. 2 members of the team left the site that night and never came back. The ground remembers. Within hours of the chamber being opened, the ground above it broke. An earthquake struck near the Iraq and Turkey border with no tectonic explanation. There is no active fault line in that area, capable of producing what was recorded. The rupture extended nearly 60 miles underground, and it did not spread and branch the way earthquakes normally do. It cut in a single straight line, as if something had drawn it deliberately from below. Geological analysts used a phrase that almost never appears in scientific reporting. They called it structurally intentional. Roads collapsed without warning, buildings tilted not from shaking, but from the ground beneath them simply dropping away. Storm systems formed across Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, with no meteorological warning. Rivers rose beyond what rainfall could account for. Electronic systems failed across the region in areas where the infrastructure was completely undamaged. Animals registered it before any instrument did. Dogs refused to leave shelter. Night insects vanished from entire regions. Livestock stopped moving completely. These animals were not reacting to noise or visible danger. They were detecting something moving through the ground and the air simultaneously. Something they wanted no part of. Witnesses in separate towns with no contact with each other reported the same experience at the same time. A sudden heaviness. An inability to think clearly, a deep dread with no visible source. And above the storm systems, glowing figures were seen moving through violent winds that were tearing structures apart on the ground below, completely unaffected, appearing at the exact peaks of the storm's intensity. Every disturbance traced back to one point: the chamber, the broken chains, the open passageways. The Euphrates was named in Eden. It marked the boundary of God's promise to Abraham. It became the road into exile when Israel turned away, and Revelation named it as the site of the final release. The same river. From the first page of Scripture to the last. In Luke chapter 21, Jesus was asked directly what the signs of his return would look like. He described nations in distress, people collapsing from fear. Then he said, "The powers of the heavens will be shaken." Throughout Scripture, the word powers refers to a specific class of supernatural being. The exact class Revelation chapter 9 describes as bound at the Euphrates. Their release is the shaking Jesus warned about. He named it before it happened. Matthew chapter 24, verse 33, says, "When you see all these things together, you will know it is near. Not one sign. All of them. A river drying that Scripture said would dry. Chains that nothing human could have produced, broken from the inside. Warnings from civilizations that never communicated, all carrying the same message. Footprints of 4 beings moving in formation with no return tracks. A surface response that geology cannot explain. These are not separate events. They are arriving together. There is a parable Jesus told about 10 young women waiting for a bridegroom. All 10 of them knew he was coming. All 10 were waiting. But when the moment arrived, only 5 were ready. The parable does not separate people between those who knew and those who did not. All 10 knew. The only difference was preparation. The God who set those chains also opened the Jordan River for Israel to cross into their promised land. And when Jesus stepped into that same Jordan River, the heavens were torn open. The word used in the original Greek is schizo, to tear, to rip apart, not open gently, torn. The Spirit descended. The Father spoke. That was the moment the world was shown who he was. The King was announced at the Jordan, and he is coming back. When he does, the dead will hear his voice. Jesus asked one question that he never answered himself. It is recorded in Luke chapter 18, verse 8. He asked, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? He left it open. He directed it forward. He directed it here. That question is for every person watching this right now.